It's actually, I got to tell you, it's rare that I follow two speakers who are obviously tremendous speakers, to be honest with you, and I hope I can live up to that, so to speak. Um, as Rafe already noted, we have worked together, and to give you a little bit of background, I got my PhD, and I was actually in academia for close to a decade, and I left to start Beacon Economics largely because it turns out academia was full of academics. And they were making me a little crazy. And I went in the world and I started Beacon Economics, but I should point out that Beacon was I never intended Beacon to be just a standard for-profit company. I always saw my mission to be working with educational institutions. Indeed, to the point now where one of the things Rafe didn't mention is I'm actually now out at UC Riverside, where, of course, the speaker got his PhD from. I'm managing a new Center for Economic Development out there, which is a lot of fun, along with my duties at Beacon Economics. When it comes to working with academic institutions, I had run into Rafe here and there, and we had a conversation once, and Rafe made this comment to me that there are certain things, there are certain points in my life where someone says one or two sentences to me that I find to be such sheer brilliance, and it really changes my perception of the world. And Rafe made one of these comments to me, and it stuck with me ever since. It's one of the reasons why I knew immediately we were going to work well together. And it's so actually important for the conversation we're here right now. So we were talking about what I would consider to be the relatively dysfunctional situation in many parts of the California economy, where more often than not we seem to be our own worst enemies. And Rafe said, the problem in California is we have too much democracy. And that has stuck with me ever since, because we always view democracy as the ultimate guiding light, but you can really have too much of it. And when you think about what too much democracy means, you have to understand that too much democracy ends up clouding the lines of responsibility. Makes it hard to figure out who's supposed to be doing what and why and how. It often leads to a misallocation of public resources, and I can go on and on and on about that. And of course, it also, in many ways, promotes NIMBYism and impedes, in many ways, what I would call the efforts, the community efforts, to make the investments within our region to help the region prosper. That is what a lot of this conversation is about. We're not going to fix too much democracy here today. That's pretty obvious. But what we can do is change the tone of the conversation. And Rafe came to me and he said, we want to talk about the 710 corridor. We don't want to talk about the cities. We don't want to talk about the unincorporated areas. We want to talk about this region. And by the way, LA, you talk about the too much democracy. 10 million people, 88 cities, of which, by the way, the largest city is not a city at all. It's 1 million plus people underneath the auspices of the county. One of the reasons we had so much fun in the Central Valley project is I went up there with not the view most people have. I cannot begin to tell you how often I've heard about the Central Valley. It's a depression-type place. It's horribly bad, filled with poverty and everything else. I didn't see that. No, yeah, okay, some of the numbers don't look as good as you might see in other parts of the state, but you got to look at the trends, not the levels. And when you look at the Central Valley, when you look here at the 710 corridor, and you look at the trends, if you focus on the trends rather than the levels, a different picture starts to arise. And when you take a step back and look at the assets and where the assets should be, then you can start coming up with a vision of how you improve things. But you first start with the positives. You first start with what's here, what's going on, what are the opportunities. Stop talking about challenges for a second. What are the opportunities? Because we live, by the way, in the middle of, for those of you who might be confused, Southern California, you're from New York, I'm from upstate New York. For those of you who are from here, you might not know this, California's paradise. Period. People want to be here. People want to live here. Our success is not in question. It's only a function of us having to go out and grab it. Simple as that. So today I'm going to start out with information. This is just a data dump. That's all we did. We dove into the data, we did a deep dive, and it's a start to the regional view. And the key word here is this is a start. I'm going to finish these 20-some-odd slides, and at the end, you're going to have 50 questions that weren't answered. That's okay. That's why we're here. This is not the end. This is the start of the conversation. And what I want to present to you right now is that start. So, oh, hang on. One more announcement. Hang on. No, go ahead. That's all right. All right. Everybody got that? Both panels. All right. Anything else, Rafe? No? All right. Any lights on in the parking lot? No? Okay, here we go. Making sure. All right. Let's just start with a basic definition, which is going to help if I have this thing working. There we go. What exactly is the 710 corridor? And so what is the region we're talking about? Of course, we're talking about a region that more or less stems from the kind of northern reaches of the Long Beach, greater Long Beach economy, the poor communities, the case may be, going all the way up roughly to what I would call the southern tip of the San Gabriel Valley. It starts a little bit east of the 110 and goes out, not quite out to the 605 as the case may be. Now, of course, this is made up of a bunch of little cities, Bell, Linwood, Bell Gardens, Maywood, Commerce, so on and so forth. It also includes, of course, some unincorporated communities, including East LA, Florence, Rancho Dominguez, East Compton, so on and so forth. But again, it's the last time I'm going to mention any of those political names. That's it. From here on out, this is the 710 corridor. What is the 710 corridor? Well, first of all, it's a community of about 750,000 people. That's a big place. Think about that. That would make it roughly a little larger, well, actually about half again as large as the city of Long Beach, to put that in context. So it would end up, if this was a combined community, you would be the third largest city in the overall region. Most of the folks live in incorporated areas, about 500,000 in those small cities, but 250,000, of course, live in the unincorporated parts. The area has grown a little slower than the overall county since 1990, about 11% overall population growth, considered about 14% for the county overall. But I think it's interesting to note that particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, you've seen a big acceleration in population growth here compared to other parts of the county, and that will continue. Remember, we're in the midst of a housing crunch. That's going to be one of the conversations I'm about to have as well. And, of course, that is pushing populations east, not only into the eastern part of the county, but out in the Inland Empire as well. So that trend will continue. You're going to see, I think, more higher than average population growth in this region for a while, largely because of some of these housing issues we're dealing with right now. As for the racial profile, as the case may be, probably not much of a surprise in this room, but it is predominantly Hispanic, almost 90% Hispanic, and a smattering of other groups there, but really this is a very, very Hispanic area. It's also very young, as already noted by the speaker. You're talking about 25% of the population being under 15 years old, compared that to less than 20% for the county overall. And of course, on the other side of the fence, you look at the older ages from 45 up, smaller than that share. So you're talking about a very Hispanic, very young community. In many ways, this is the future of LA in so many different ways. As for, of course, the citizenship status, probably not too much to survive. For the older folks, so those over 18, less than half the population is, in fact, a citizen of the United States. On the other hand, below 18, you're talking about 94%. So again, you see the legacy of past waves of immigration. This is not a modern thing. And, you know, one of the questions that was asked to us is, how many of the folks in the area here are documented immigrants versus, of course, undocumented immigrants? That is an interesting question, and one we really don't have the ability to answer. The data sets we use, by definition, do not ask that question in order to make sure they get as much participation as possible. There is some other data sets. We went to the Public Policy Institute of California. They do some amazing work around the state. And, of course, you can see there, it's kind of a heat map of undocumented immigrants. And, yep, you're right in the middle of it. They estimate that something on the order of 15% of the residents here in the particular region are undocumented. Now, there's some good news and bad news about that situation. The bad news is obviously is not being documented reduces your ability and really in many ways interest in participating in the public dialogue. And that is something we have to change. There's no doubt about it. And, of course, it is changing because the children of these families more often than not are in fact immigrants. Now, what is the good news? The good news is, at least as what the speaker said, according to the polls right now, there's an 87% chance that Trump's going to lose. So we can start having a real conversation about this as opposed to that particular nonsense, as the case may be. So we're moving in the right direction on that front. As for, oops, let me go back. As for conversations about income, it is a low-income community. There's no doubt about it. It is also a community that has higher than average poverty rates. Now, mind you, things haven't been that bad. They've been steady over the past 5 years. You've seen overall median household income remaining at about $40,000. Now, our data goes through 2014. The 2015 data came out after we were actually completed the majority of this particular report. But we did get some positive news in 2015 for the county overall. There was a big increase in income. And when you look, when we kind of scrape away at the surface, it is actually, believe it or not, lower income households that are starting to prosper in the current economic environment for a number of reasons I won't get into. So I'm quite positive that when we do pull the numbers for 2015, you're going to see incomes here in the region starting to rise as well. So incomes, not as high as we might like, but there are people out there, they're working, they're making money, and things are getting better on that particular front. Now, why are incomes so low? Well, that's largely a function of human capital or educational attainment, as the case may be. If you look at the number here, overall study area, you can see that almost half the population has not completed high school, relative to the county overall, where that's about 22%. Now, this, again, is a legacy of immigration. Remember, a lot of these families came from places where, candidly, you didn't have the opportunity to complete education. What the positive things that come out of this is really the fact that, well, when you look at this lack of education, you start to realize it's primarily, again, in the older years, the 45, 65 plus. If you look at the younger generation, for example, 25 to 34-year-olds in the region, you see a completely different picture. A picture where well over 50% have indeed completed high school. That's a big shift up. In fact, 30% of the population has finished high school. I'm counting up real quick here, pardon me, 33. About 34% have actually gone beyond and have gotten some sort of, whether it's associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, some sort of certificate, and of course there's even a small number have gotten on to graduate school. Now, mind you, overall educational attainment in the area is still low, particularly on the college front. And I think everybody in this room understands that nowadays in our world, having that tertiary education is so important for long-run success. So things are getting better, but they need to get better even more so. And to the point the speaker already made, one of the big shortages, one of the big issues in the local region, in the 710 corridor, is a lack of educational resources. I mean, yes, I get it. LA County, from Cal State LA, you got Cal State Long Beach, but too often that means people getting in a car, commuting, and it creates a burden that really doesn't need to exist. With 750,000 people living here, there should be more educational resources. And Lord knows there's been investments. There's been a big surge in overall county employment in private colleges, universities, professional schools. More of that needs to come into this region, one of the critical things that needs to be talked about. As for the workforce itself, now there's two ways of discussing the local economy, and we have to be very careful about defining these. One way is to talk about workers who live in the region. That's a residence-based conversation. And then, of course, there are businesses that are based here as well. I'm first going to talk about the workers that are here, and then I'll talk a little bit about the businesses that are here. Overall employment in the region has been increasing back in 2010. Of course, it really just in the back end of the Great Recession, only about 280,000 people, employed people, lived in this particular region. Now it's up to about 295,000 as of 2014, and I guarantee it's well over 300,000 coming into the more recent data for 2015 and moving on to 2016. What kind of industries do people here work in? Well, it's interesting. It's not what you would consider to be your standard you think about Silicon Beach, you think about the professional services downtown LA. No, this is going to be a little bit more of a blue-collar workforce, but nevertheless manning at some incredibly important parts of the LA economy, manufacturing being first and foremost. Over 52,000 people here in the region work in manufacturing. That is a traditional part of the LA economy, one that we know hasn't been doing great from an employment standpoint, but is still moving forward. And of course, those folks have important skills that will continue to help the overall economy grow. Education, healthcare, big everywhere. A little less here than in other parts of the county. Retail trade is up there as well, 37,000. Leisure, hospitality, professional business services at some level. Transport, warehousing is another big sector, as is construction. You know, here, more so than other parts of the county, people rely on public transport to get to work, whether they're carpooling. Almost 10% of the population actually uses, 9% of the population use some sort of public transport. mostly buses. Now, there's no reason for this. If you take it a step back and you look at the overall region, you realize this is an incredibly important part of the infrastructure in the system. You are right next to a very important line, that blue line that goes down to Long Beach. There's some major bus lines as well. But overall, there can be and should be more connections into this new burgeoning light rail system. Now, the good news on that front is you take a look at the MTA's long-term plans, they're planning on running some lines to the community. And I think that's going to be really helpful to tie this community to the rest of the overall economy out here. But, of course, that's something that needs to be worked on. One of the better assets that are in the community, something to think about as well, are the roads. This area is in the middle of one of the most extensive network of roadways. You have the 105, you have the 710, you have the 91, incredibly important linkages. And that is an asset. I realize the pollution conversation is something we all need to have, but also recognize if you ask businesses about where they like to locate businesses, where they want to locate, two of the things to think about here, the two major things they worry about. One is access to electronic communication. That is to say, having a major infrastructure of information transportation, the fiber optic lines and all that. Number two is physical transportation, having access to roadways. I understand there are frustrations with the highways. As you know, the 710 was supposed to go all the way up to the 210 at one point in time, and it still hasn't happened because of some of those frustrations. But this is an asset inasmuch as many of the businesses seeking to locate themselves in Southern California want access to those roadways, and that's a good way of making sure that you are on the map when businesses are thinking about where to locate next. As for businesses themselves, what kind of businesses are in the area? Well, it's predominantly dominated, again, by trade and manufacturing. Wholesale trade is near the top. Think of companies working with those ports, working with the various groups that distribute products across Southern California. Manufacturing is number two. This is one of the manufacturing centers of Los Angeles. And we hear all the time, we hear a lot of, shall we say, complaints about the diminishing manufacturing part of the LA economy. Well, folks, this is where it's at. If you're a public developer and you're worried about manufacturing, these are the communities you need to be working with. This is the group in this room you need to be talking to. Because working with the manufacturers that are already here is the best way of making sure our manufacturing sector remains strong and vibrant as we move into a world where the U.S. does have the ability to compete with the rest of the world in so many different ways and export products and, of course, provide products to the rest of the economy. Now, also up there, you'll see retail, trade, and leisure and hospitality. I want to spend a little time talking about leisure and hospitality. You know, L.A. is known for tourism, but when you think tourism, a lot of times you're thinking Santa Monica and Hollywood. Well, guess what? There's a big tourism sector here in the 710 corridor as well. Now, it is, of course, wrapped around those three big card clubs. You have Crowne Plaza, the Bicycle Hotel Casino, Commerce Casino. Hey, don't knock it. You're talking 6,000 to 7,000 people working in those three institutions. If you look at Vegas and how Vegas is on fire, it's wrapped around the gaming industry. Yeah, I know there's some downsides, but also understand the upsides of having that entertainment center and all the things you can connect to that entertainment center. Everything from music venues and restaurants and everything else. This is something to work on top of. And, of course, it also provides a lot of money, a lot of revenues to the local communities, also very important. As for retail market itself, you know, office here is not doing too well. Suburban office markets across the county are doing bad. It's only the core stuff. But the retail stuff is doing great. Right now, vacancy rates in the area are 6.2%. Prices are still relatively affordable. You know, one of the things we looked at, and we were quite pleased about this, was we saw that, you know, a lot of places we talk about, for example, food deserts, where people just don't have access to local retail. I'm sorry, I'm having a tough time getting this thing to move. There we go. When we looked at the numbers, if you look at, say, taxable sales in the region relative to number of population, it looks like taxable sales per person is relatively low. But that's a metric created by the lower than average incomes in the community. If you look at taxable sales as a percent of incomes, turns out more people are spending money here in their local community than in other parts of the county, as the case may be. There is a very active and vibrant retail sector here. Again, something else to be working on. And much of this is small retail, small businesses. And remember, that kind of entrepreneurial spirit is something you can work with and work upon to help these folks succeed. Again, this can be really a long-run asset for the overall area. As for logistics itself, as already noted, you're right on a critical linkage to those ports up there, and you certainly see it in terms of the active warehouse space out here. Now, the warehouse space here is in kind of a weird place. You know, the new trend in warehouses is these big, mega kind of warehouses you're seeing out in the Inland Empire, which are millions of square feet with lots of automation. Here, it's an older stock, it's a smaller stock, but nevertheless, it's here and it's busy for a very good reason. This is a great place to be. There are conversations to be had about taking this asset and moving forward with it. How do you help your industrial warehouse center go to the next level to compete with those mega centers going out there in the Inland Empire? There are things that can be done, that should be done, and again, that could be a big help to the local economy, to the local communities. Now, with all that transportation comes pollution. And, you know, pollution here is a problem. If you look at the air quality, it's some of the worst in LA County, but it's not the 710 corridor. Really, it's this entire region extending right out into Riverside County and partly into San Bernardino County. We understand this is an issue, and keep in mind, as bad as it is now, it's much better than it was 20 or 25 years ago. There are ways of dealing with this, ways that work with the economy. One of the biggest successes for air quality that we don't really talk about too much is the Alameda Corridor project, which, you know, heavy rail, allowing trains to move from the port to bring stuff inland. Guess what? That reduced pollution, because trains are a lot cleaner than trucks are, substantially. More investment in these kind of heavy transport resources can both allow the local economy to flourish while cleaning up the air. It's a matter of having the conversation to understand that there is an in-between. There's a ways of having both cleaner air and an active sector if you find the right investments to put your money into. Oops, that went too far that time. Now, last but not least, you can see money is coming into the area. Permit values, particularly for industrial and retail, are up relatively high. And one of the things you'll find in the book that we've been trying to play around with a little bit is a little bit about the nonprofits in the area and what nonprofits are there. Don't have a lot of conclusions yet, but we are putting the data out there for you to chew on that particular front. How about the housing? Now, I want to talk about the housing in particular because, as you know, we have a housing problem in Los Angeles. Largely, we have a lack of housing. Now, I've heard a lot about the affordable housing crisis. Forget all that. It's not an affordable housing crisis. It's a housing crisis. The difference is this. It's expensive for most everybody, and it's expensive because we're not building enough of everything. Now, when I think about the county and how the county is dealing with it, I see a lot of fights going on in areas where there's already a lot of new housing coming online. And then I look at a place like the 710 corridor, and what I see is an enormous asset that's being underutilized. Take a look at what the housing stock looks like here. Only 0.3% has been built after 2010. The vast majority of the stock here in the region is older. There hasn't been a lot of new investment. Another thing is, despite the fact that there are so many people living here, despite the fact that you're dealing with a place where you have 4 residents per unit compared to 2.75 for the county overall, the majority of the housing stock is still single family. You have these resources. You're fairly close to a light rail. There's more light rails coming online. You have these highways around. This place is ripe for high-density, transit-oriented development. Why the resources aren't coming here is an important question, because the county needs it, the region can use it, and it seems like it's a low-density housing place, and it's a high-density population place. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay. Yeah. Oh, you're agreeing with me. Oh, okay. I thought you were disagreeing with me. I'm like, I was like, what did I say wrong? Oh, no. Right, okay, there you go. Phew. Scared me there. It's not often I'm heckled, So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there as well. But again, that conversation has to be had. How can you get the region to build more of these housing resources? And it's critical here, because the overcrowding housing problem is worse here than, it's bad across the county. But here, almost 28% of the housing is overcrowded. That is to say, more than one person per room. Not per bedroom, one person per room. That's an enormous amount of local housing stock. By investing in more housing, you're helping the county and you're helping the residents. Clearly, there's a huge opportunity here. It's the next big place to be doing this. That's a big step in the right direction. And of course, You could look at the rental prices. You could look at the lack of vacancies. Rental vacancy rates across the place here are less than 3%. Now, if you look at downtown, vacancy rates are going up. Right now, downtown vacancies are getting close to 6%. That's because a ton of new stock has come online, but it's all A space. It's space that most people can't afford. And there's too much of that. It's a glut. What's desperately needed in the county is workforce housing. And again, when you think about the local community, this is ripe for it. It's proper for it. The county just has to create the systems to get it to be built. Huge opportunity. And are there things coming online? The answer is no. In 2014, there was one surge of multifamily. In 2015, it dropped down. Overall, and by the way, not only does this help the local population, but it also helps the local tax base. Assessed values coming out of real estate is an important part of local population, particularly money for schools. Keep that in mind. Investing in local housing can help in many ways by also bringing in more revenues. Incredibly important part. So, as already noted, this was a first glance at what our report's going to be saying overall. RAFE will be released in about a week or so. And again, you're going to look at this, and you're going to have even more questions. And the argument here is not that this report was intended to answer everything, but to get your juices flowing. This community has enormous potential. You think about the youth. You think about the space. You think about the location. It's yours to grab. But you're going to have to come together to do it. And you're going to have to create a community push to get those kind of local obstacles, overcome those local obstacles, to make the proper investments. So thank you very much for your attention, and I think we have time for a little Q&A, right? Yeah.